We're sitting here at AERA in New York in a courtyard, and I'm visiting with Yvonna Lincoln, Dr. Yvonna Lincoln, the expert on qualitative inquiry, qualitative research methods, a champion of qualitative inquiry, innovator, and prolific writer about the topic. So thank you for agreeing to do this. We're trying to create some awareness videos, and we're going to discuss qualitative research methods and important changes we've seen over the past, say, 5 editions of the qualitative handbook, the Sage Handbook of Qualitative Research.
Okay.
Maybe we can start, Yvonna. What are some of the changes you've seen in the last 5 decades looking at qualitative research when you first entered to now?
For one thing, we have begun adding lenses through which people can filter findings. We've been looking at post-colonial lens, feminist lens, race and ethnic studies lenses, border theories, hybridity theories, embodied theories, LGBTQ theories. We've been looking at ways in which one can complicate the findings that we have, ways in which we can look for evidence of oppression, injustice, the way the law is messed around to favor white privilege. And I think we've tried to portray some of those changes in the various editions of the handbook to complicate and to extend the way in which we can understand what it is we're seeing and how it is it impacts the lives of people, not only at the center but mostly at the margin.
But when I think about the 1994 edition and your chapter with Don Guba, in some ways I think it was a justification of why qualitative research can be considered research against a quantitative backdrop. Would you?
I would agree with that.
And that chapter's evolved, I think, over the editions.
It has. One of the things that we tried to do, Egon and I, was to demonstrate that there is a systematicity, a kind of scientific rigor in qualitative research, and it's an answer to the diehards who say this research is nothing but anecdotal. It's a way of saying, no, it's far more than that. It can be systematic, it can be rigorous, it fulfills the definition of disciplined inquiry, and it shows findings in a way that highly quantitative research cannot. It can show you the why. Quantitative research can show you what's happening. Qualitative research can show you why it is happening the way it is.
What do you think about the notions of if a quantitative person asks, is it generalizable? And I know you spoke about transferability at one point.
Right.
Where do you sit on that issue now?
My notion is the same as it always was, which is that generalizability relies on an assumption that contexts are the same from place to place. And I would argue contexts are not the same, and contexts are heavily implicated in the way we interpret findings. As I tell my students, if it plays in Peoria, that doesn't necessarily mean it plays in Phoenix or Petaluma, because the contexts are very different and the people in those contexts are different.
So then would you say that the onus shifts from the researcher as the guarantor to the reader to decide if those findings apply, or those contexts are similar?
Absolutely. It's the user, the end user, who has to say, this part of the research is very usable. This part is not so much like my context. This stuff I can adapt. This stuff, not so much. It's a way of saying the researcher does not have the God's eye view. The user is the person with the real view, because that's the person who knows his or her context most thoroughly.
When I get thinking of the impact of scholarship on public policy, sometimes I've had quantitative colleagues tell me, well, your findings just don't have any impact on public policy. One of the things I get thinking of is that neither do the quantitative findings. Often inconvenient findings are ignored.
Right, exactly, yes. And I think it really depends on who's in charge of the data. When we got a new Institute for Educational Studies and they started wiping clean the studies that they felt didn't contribute to what works, then we started denying whole bodies of knowledge. What we need to have is some nonpartisan folks in charge of that bureau who can say, wait a minute, all knowledge might be useful. We have to figure out how we go about making all that knowledge available so that end users can figure out what is useful for them. We don't need to have some bureaucrat sitting at the top of IES who says, no, these knowledges are not useful. Only this kind of knowledge, mostly big data knowledge, is useful. But we've had, since the Bush era, a series of partisan directors of the Institute for Educational Studies or secretaries of education who have very partisan views and very limited ideas of what forms usable knowledge.
There are some of the dangers, I think, of where things are going in terms of scholarship and qualitative research in particular. I wonder, are there other areas of concern where you see, pitfalls or like areas that keep you up at night?
Nothing keeps me up at night these days. I can sleep on a moving train, but what troubles me is this notion that what we really need to answer social problems is big data. I worry about these huge national databases that people are being trained to use, because I think that they're going to ultimately feed into policy in ways that further shape policy to the right, rather than looking at a wide range of knowledge that we might use. It seems to me that what we've done is we've collected a lot of big data, and so now people say, well, what do we do with it? Answer, we're going to fund a lot of people to see what they can do with it, rather than say, what are the questions that we need to have answered? Will big data answer those questions, or do we need other kinds of data? Because big data aren't going to answer the questions in ways that prove useful to policy that's oriented to social justice or equity, relieving oppression, democratizing education. Big data aren't going to do that for us, I'm afraid.
You once, to quote you, you once famously said to me, the academy that I entered is not the one I'm leaving. What did you mean by that? What's changed in the academy you're leaving?
The academy that I'm leaving is so focused on quantity rather than quality. It's focused on external funding, and that, of course, is because the amount of money that states and the federal government are putting into education has been slowly shrinking. And indeed, what we're doing is asking young scholars to fund their faculty positions, basically, or some portion of them. What scares me is that a person like me, it's somebody that I think has some good ideas couldn't get tenured these days. That sort of person who isn't bringing in a lot of money will not earn tenure in today's Research One institution. And I think that's troublesome because I think one of the places we need to move is we need to move back to where we were, where researchers do smaller studies and they expend a lot of their own time and resources on doing them. They don't necessarily have to have external funding to do them. They're more local studies. Excuse me, and they rely on transferring the findings to determine what is being called these days impact. Okay, everybody's looking for impact. And I think we're going to have to, for the moment, ignore the federal government and look for impact in our own regions, our own areas. And then let people from other regions and other areas see the kinds of changes we've been able to effect and see whether those are transferable to their own situations, their own contexts.
You mentioned a term to me earlier, weaponized accountability.
Yes.
Can you speak to that?
Well, yes and no. I'm not finished with that yet, but I'm very concerned with the fact that there are corporations out there trying to sell to institutions programs where faculty go in and they enter everything they do, and the universities are able to use these web-based forms for promotion and tenure, for awards, we're looking for people for awards, to look for performance reviews, merit pay, etc. I'm very concerned that what's happening is those forms make a faculty member's career look standardized. And I think the more elaborate those forms become, the more accountability it becomes not a sense of stewardship for using public money wisely and with integrity, but for using a faculty member's career solely for the enhancement of the institution or the punishment of a faculty member for not doing what the institution values. I also think that these kinds of forms take on a life of their own so that the kinds of things that faculty do best, thinking, reading, having engagements with colleagues where ideas are developed, those things begin to take second place to making sure that the form is updated, that it's current, right? Because you never know how your department head or your dean or your provost is going to want to use that form. That's what I mean when I say it's weaponized, because it's very easy to use that sort of system as not only as a system for rewarding faculty, but also as a system for penalizing faculty who aren't doing what the institution values, but are instead doing what the life of the mind values. That's what I mean when I call it weaponized accountability.
It's a wonderful turn of phrase. I like it.
Wait till I write the paper.
Yeah,
You're going to be
yes.
quite surprised.
I'm looking forward to that paper. And be sure to put it in your accountability forms.
Right.
I'd hate to end on the weaponized accountability note. I wonder what areas, what developments, new developments in qualitative research, qualitative inquiry that make you hopeful, that give you hope.
Oh, Okay, well, I think there are a couple of things that are going to be increasingly important. And I'm really sort of sorry in a way that Norman and I probably will not be doing a sixth edition of the handbook because I think that this is going to be terribly important. I think, for instance, the post-humanists are going to have an enormous impact on the way we think about what we include in qualitative research. The new materialists, particularly the feminist materialists, I think the whole notion of entanglement theory is going to be important. And of course, those are things that haven't been explored nearly enough in the fifth edition. The sixth edition will have to deal with that stuff in a massively important way. I think that, Norman and I did a book on critical and indigenous methodologies. I think it's time for that work to be revisited and updated in a serious and critical way to engage with the posthumanists. Jerry Rosiak would be a person who's working on that. He's going to do a workshop at ICQI on that. I think probably Norman's emphasis on performance, on culture as performed, on really life as performed. The whole issue of performance, and particularly indigenous-based inquiry, there's a critical connection there that still has to be made. That makes me kind of happy and kind of excited, and I think that probably we're going to see stronger voices out of the race and ethnic studies people. I think that those voices from the margin are moving very strongly to the center, and it seems to me that the voices of minority of color, faculty who are minority, people of color, etc., are going to have an increasingly important role, particularly in the U.S. I can't speak to Canada, but I think there are two groups, African Americans and Hispanic voices, that are going to reshape some of the inquiry that we do, both in critical inquiry, critical qualitative inquiry, and in critical quantitative inquiry. I think that there's going to be a massive push, a kind of tidal wave of the knowledge that's coming out of the faculty of color. That is eventually, it's certainly going to reshape my field, higher education, and I think probably it's going to reshape qualitative inquiry. It's just going to be stronger. And I think that there will be more minority voices to hear from, more statements from people of color and indigenous people that will not be able to be ignored. We've actually, as faculty, we've always sort of set our faculty of color over here. They're sort of this group and we nod to them. I think there's going to come a time when we can't do that anymore, when their understanding of what constitutes actionable knowledge will have to be integrated with what we think is actionable knowledge too.
Nice.
So,
I think you'll have to reconsider the sixth edition, your position on that. It sounds like we're going to need that sixth edition.
well, it's the sixth edition, in my view, would be a very different kind of edition. And it would be an edition that sought deliberately to bring those voices from the margin to the center.
Be a powerful legacy to leave, I think.
Yes,
In
it
addition
would
to the one you already have built over a number of years.
Yeah, it would be important. That would be, from my perspective, that would be one of the most important things I could do.
And is there anything you'd like to add just as we wrap up the small talk, this interview?
No, not really. I think. I mean, that would be my dream for the future, and my problem with what the present looks like. We haven't nearly dealt enough with white privilege. We haven't reached out to make common cause, and I think whoever does the 6th edition would be well advised to deal with those two things in a critical way.
Nice. Well, what a pleasure and privilege it's been to have this chat with you here in New York City in the courtyard, just outside of the AERA conference buildings that are steps away. So thanks again, Dr. Yvonna Lincoln, for your lifetime of work and for this piece as well.
Bless your heart.
Thank you.
You're welcome.